This is another episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a weekly college and NFL draft podcast with Kenneth Arthur from fieldgoals.com and Rob Staten from SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Wrapping up week 8 of the college football season, entering week 8 of the NFL season. One game left to go in week 7 as we record this, and we can talk a little bit about that. But we're going to do a quick edition of Twin Calf and then go right into something we haven't done on the show yet, which is really focus on spend a good amount of time focusing on some of the younger players in the NFL, because there are young guys in the league this season, including rookies, that are willing their teams to victory. And really seems like this is a transition period for some positions where some superstars are maybe aging out and some young guys are stepping up. And that's something that we want to talk about as well, and how these guys were viewed as prospects when they were drafted in the last couple of years. But we'll start out with this week in NCAA football, also known as Twin Calf. I think the obvious thing that I want to talk about and get Rob's opinion on, of course, is the Washington State Cougars pulling out a must-win in Arizona this week, 45-42, and Luke Falk leading the country with a season-high 514 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, and Stanford coming to Pullman this week in the biggest game for Wazoo in about 12 years. So that's exciting stuff. Unfortunately, Rob, do you know about this college game day thing?
Yeah, I've been following it closely because we actually get the college game day in all its glory over here in Britain. So I've been following it and hoping that you guys are going to get it. And I've been seeing all the stuff on Twitter. And I was listening to Brock and Salt this morning, and they were saying, and of course Brock, he works for ESPN, and he was giving out a bit of a vibe that it was gonna go to Washington State. And then about 20 minutes after I listened to that, I just saw the tweet saying, "Yeah, it's gonna Temple instead."
Yeah. So, pretty heartbreaking for those that don't know. Wazoo has sent an official flag. You know, there are different little flags going around, but they've had one flag. They've retired it twice, but they've had one flag going around for about 170 straight editions of College Game Day without missing one. About 170 straight, dating back to, I think, 2003, and they've never missed. And there's a connection to College Game Day, and they've never come to Pullman. And this was this week, I think probably for the first time ever, we finished second, but we really wanted to finish first. Temple, I know that it's a special season for Temple. They were losing in the fourth quarter this week to East Carolina, I want to say. How do you feel? Do you feel that Temple, got this win deservedly? Or do you think that the Wazoo-Stanford game has more significance than Temple-Notre Dame?
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that what is the better game. And if it was based purely on that, then Washington State would have got this. I think that what seems to be the big issue is that Kirk Herbstreit the Reese Davis are the guys who obviously host it, and they have to get to the I think they are covering the Temple Notre Dame game. So I think that there was a logistics issue there, was that they had to fly from Washington to Philadelphia essentially, and that is ultimately just wasn't possible for them this week. And maybe if they were covering like USC or somebody instead, then it would have been very, very easy to do. So I think that's obviously what has been the decision, but it's not going to take away from the fact that I don't have a team, but I've kind of got really interested in Washington State's year just as a consequence of the success story that it's been after that first defeat to Portland State. And I was really hoping that it was going to go to Pullman, but the best thing to do in this situation is to go and beat Stanford and in a great game and prove that it should have been there.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough game, and that's the thing. If they win, then everything changes. And if they lose, I think as long as they don't lose 72-0, they can still, have a lot of pride in what they've done so far, especially losing that game to Portland State. And Portland State, I think, has been a pretty good, they're 6-1 or something like that. So you never want to lose to a team of that level when you're in the Pac-12. But it's not maybe it's not like losing to Appalachian State, who was the greatest FCS. team of all time or whatever. But if maybe it motivated them to wake up and realize that it was time to buy into Mike Leach's system or whatever. I don't know. But it is what it is. And the Cougs still at 5-2 still have plenty of opportunities to get bowl eligible. And they, ESPN this week ranked them in their power rankings, the number 2 team in the Pac-12, which is pretty phenomenal. I mean, when you consider that Stanford's number 1, and Utah lost this week, they were 3rd in the country. And I don't know, I don't know necessarily that Washington State is better than Utah, but you'd been saying for a while that Utah was due for a loss. So that one did happen. The Pac-12 has just been very manic.
It's a crazy league. It's a crazy league this year, and I think that's kind of encapsulated by the way that Cal started hot and then have kind of dropped off the face of the earth. And Stanford are a dangerous opponent because they had a really bad start against Northwestern and looked terrible there. And I think they got the ideal opponent the second week was UCF, who've just been. I don't think they've won a game all year, and it kind of just got the momentum going there. They've been on a bit of a tear, but they have played disappointing teams. They played USC at their worst, Oregon State at their worst, Arizona mailed it in. There was the Jim Mora night where he was just staring blankly, akin to his Seahawks days when they hammered UCLA, and then they got a win against Washington. But you know what? It's at Washington State. If they can throw the ball around and put up the big yardage again, they've got a quarterback who is really in the zone at the moment. Who's to say that Washington State? I really hope that they can get a win because I think it's just going to get things going. It's going to make life interesting around Washington. It's going to try and take some of the pressure off everybody hoping that the Seahawks are going to do it again after every sort of Washington sports team has kind of underwhelmed so far, except Washington State. The Mariners were awful. The Seahawks have had a bit of an average start. Washington are hit and miss. So let's hope the Cougs can fly the flag, Kenny, in the next couple of weeks.
Let's definitely hope that. Also this week, Paxton Lynch, we had been talking about him last week. You were the first guy I ever heard him mentioned as a top QB in the draft. Next year, he goes 32 of 44, 447 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions in a win over Tulsa. And another big performance this week was Connor Cook, who is considered to be a first-round quarterback by many. Not a favorite of yours, Rob. He has 398 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions against Indiana. But I want to also move to some of the rushing leaders, as there were 6 200-yard games this week. And maybe I'll just rattle off these names real quick, Rob, and tell me if you think any of these guys might be a fit for the Seahawks, if any of them are legit, if any of them are because a lot of them, they don't necessarily go to big schools or anything like that. So maybe how many of them are actually prospects. So what do you think of these guys? And I'll do them real quick. Tyler Ervin, San Jose State. Robert Lowe, Texas State. Or maybe is that Texas? Matthew Daves, NC State. Jalen Nixon, ULL. Quentin Flowers, USF. And Samaj Perine, Oklahoma. Obviously, that's the biggest school out of all of those. All these guys rushed for over 200 yards. All these guys had over 7 yards per carry. Perine had 4 touchdowns. Thoughts on those 6?
Well, the one that I've kind of spent more time on than some of the others, because I have limited access to some of the smaller schools at this time, and I'm kind of dependent on draft breakdown for the smaller schools. But I have seen Perine, and he's got real potential. I think he's been a little bit underwhelming in some of the games that I've seen this year. May have even been a bit banged up as well. But he's the one who set the rushing record last year when Melvin Gordon broke the big record. Was it LaDainian Tomlinson's, I think? That he broke the record, and then a week later, Perine broke it again. And it's got a real combination of speed and power, and he's a big guy. He's bigger than Leonard Fournette, but is perhaps not quite as explosive. So he's one. If you're looking for a guy that in the next couple of years that could make it in the league, then certainly he is the name that stands out there. Can I mention one other running back, though, this weekend? And just because it's nothing to do with the way that he played necessarily. It is because there's a picture, and you may well have seen this, Kenny. And if you haven't seen it, head over to this guy's Twitter account. It's Andrew J. Bone. So his name is Andrew Bone, which is a great name, which is just a fantastic name right off the bat. But he has a picture of Derrick Henry of Alabama smoking a giant fat cigar in the locker room with Nick Saban after the game. And that just for me was a apart from Washington State's victory and getting to see Laramie Tunsil on the field for the first time, taking on Myles Garrett, I think seeing Derrick Henry with a big fat cigar in his mouth and his chops was probably the best thing.
Yes, I did see that photo. It is sort of, it was what it's nice about it is that there's a nostalgia there. Where I think it helps that it's a black and white, but it's like you kind of feel like if you draft a guy like that, you're drafting a man to come play for your football team. And these guys are so young and you forget that. But then at the same time, when you look at a guy like Fournette or you look at a guy like Henry, it's like, yeah, let's get some more men on this football team and push some people around. Perine, 427 yards. I thought the name was familiar. I guess that's just the thing. Like, is he a true sophomore? He's not draft eligible?
Yeah, he's not draft eligible. But he could come out obviously the same year that Leonard Fournette comes out. He's one of like a big group of running backs that could just dominate the draft next year. Before we move on, there's a couple of other quick things I think we need to mention.
Sure.
Carson Wentz is a quarterback for North Dakota State, who I mentioned at the start of the year, and I think in one of the early podcasts, that he's a guy who could rise. And for me, might be the third best quarterback in this year's draft, after obviously Paxton Lynch and Jared Goff. But he's broken his wrist, and it's going to put him on I think he's going to be sidelined for the rest of the season. There's still a chance that he's going to come back for the postseason. They do have a postseason at that level. It's quite lengthy, so there's a chance there. But he is somebody that it's worth keeping an eye on. If he goes to the Shrine Game, he could go to the Senior Bowl. Carson Wentz is obviously, it's sad that he's injured, but he's quite a good player and he could make a good prospect for somebody. And the other thing is that while we're talking about running backs, I thought that Alex Collins looked really good again this weekend. And again, he's a player that not many people focus on. There's going to be some value there, either on the second or the third day. He's not going to be a first round or early second round pick. But if Seattle is looking to add a running back to their stable that is kind of the kind of player that they have looked for at running back, he certainly, again, was really, really good at the weekend. So one to keep an eye on. He played well against Auburn.
One other player that I want to ask you about, because we haven't talked at all about the tight end class of 2016, and I don't know anything about this guy specifically, maybe because he plays at Florida International. I don't know exactly who the top tight end prospects are for next year's draft. We haven't really dug into that yet. But the number 2 receiver in the country this week, as far as totals this week, was a tight end, which I look at the leaderboards every week. I haven't seen tight ends up there. Jonnu Smith from Florida International had 10 catches for 183 yards. He's a big guy. He's not necessarily 6'6", 6'7". He's listed at 6'3", 230 pounds. If he stays at a tight end, if he were to enter the draft, then, that's one thing. His season totals are, modest but last year he had 61 catches for 710 yards. Do you know anything about Jonnu Smith? Who is the top tight end prospect for next season?
It's not a good class for tight ends at all, really. You're really having to sort of find somebody who's got a bit of potential there that you could maybe do it. I think probably the Arkansas tight end, Hunter Henry, is probably the best bet if he does end up declaring for the draft, which he may well do, because it just seems like Arkansas are never, ever going to get over that little sort of slump that they're in. So I would think that Hunter Henry is the one. I've not seen Jonnu Smith, the Florida International guy, but he's somebody I will check out. There's one other thing that is broken today, I think, Kenny, that probably one final thing we need to touch on here, and that is that Baylor's quarterback, Seth Russell, is going to be out for the rest of the year. Now, Baylor are ranked in the playoffs at the moment. I think they may be the number 2 or the number 3 team. This is going to really hamper their chances of defeating TCU, because one of those teams is probably not going to make the playoffs. So this is going to be Jarrett Stidham taking over for the rest of the way. He's actually Baylor's best ever recruit, so he was their highest ever recruit. So he's very highly rated. I think he was something like the number 3 quarterback in the year that he was recruited. So he's a true freshman. He's just come to the program, and now he's going to start. But he's got an opportunity to impress early. But Baylor's chances this year are now on the shoulders of a true freshman quarterback.
Yeah, I know that Art Briles, he gave him, he came out saying he has confidence in the backup, that he's more polished than people might expect. But really, especially at the college level, I mean, in the NFL level, whether or not, say, a guy like Brock Osweiler comes in, I think it's sort of 4 years in, you would have some doubts. not because he couldn't beat out Peyton Manning, but 4 years, most of these guys, if it's not, I would just say that he probably would have gotten traded if there was something really flashing through these last 4 years. But in college, I mean, you can be recruited as the top guy in the country and be terrible. You can be recruited as number 500 and be great. So it will be interesting to see, but there really is no way to know until he gets on the field. Being a true freshman, though, I mean, it would be interesting to see if Baylor won the national championship, and then you have back-to-back national champions where a guy comes in like Cardale Jones at the end of the season and does what he does, and if this guy comes out and does something, obviously it'll be the story of the year for maybe even overshadowing Leonard Fournette. So at the very least, I haven't watched a ton of Baylor this year. I'm probably going to be tuning in to see what happens because that's something that's pretty interesting when your top recruit, true freshman, has to take over for the quarterback while you're a top 2 or 3 team in the nation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And by the way, I've not seen any of Baylor. They've not put one Baylor game on over here yet. So I can't really count. There's a few interesting guys, but they just haven't put them on, which is really surprising.
Well, between me and you, what's the streaming, illegal website type deal in the UK? Are there any sort of ways to get these games over there that maybe are less savory?
Yeah, there's 2 options. There is like a go-to kind of streaming site that you could go to, but then it kind of got shut down. And I think the Premier League had something to do with this because they are very, very strict. I mean, they make so much money on international TV rights. I think they actually shut down the site because it supplied the NFL and the college football as well as the Premier League. You can also pay for over here we have something called Game Pass. So if you want to watch every Seahawks game or you want to watch every NFL game, you kind of pay a subscription and you can watch them all online. Yeah. But you can do the same with college football, and it's run by ESPN. The only problem with that is you don't get the Pac-12 games, which I think the Pac-12 network has covered, and you don't get the SEC games that aren't on ESPN. So you are basically limited to whatever ESPN is showing. I did subscribe to this for 1 year, but I got tired of watching Clemson just destroy small school opponents 76-0, and that was kind of the only option you had. So I just take the games that they give me. They give me about 4 to 5 every week, so I'll just live with that.
Well, yeah, good luck with the upcoming college schedule that they will force upon you. The NFL schedule, which obviously is more open to selling whatever game you want to see, is what we want to get into now and talking about some of these young players around the league. We're going to talk about how they're doing, who are the best right now, how they'll look for the future, who's overrated, who's underrated, and how are these guys seen maybe as high school recruits or even in college draft prospects. I want to start, I think it's always nice to start with the quarterback. It's comfortable. Everybody knows who all 32 quarterbacks is, I think, if you're a diehard NFL fan. So it's somewhere to start. And, I think the 2014 class, while it wasn't seen as being, top heavy, and there was some controversy about who was the best, were these guys being underrated, overrated? You get these guys in the late first, early second. You really don't know what you're going to get. And the 2014 class now, they didn't start out the year last year. It was wasn't too sure how good these guys were going to be. Their rookie seasons were very uneven. And I think now in their second year already, some of these guys have really stepped up. And I'm talking about Derek Carr, Blake Bortles, and Teddy Bridgewater. Bortles went 3rd overall. Bridgewater went 32nd. Derek Carr went 36th. And just a thing that I wrote this week for sportsonearth.com that'll be coming out on Tuesday is I ranked every single quarterback in the NFL because it's a really interesting year where you've got a guy like Peyton Manning who may be one of the 5 worst quarterbacks in the NFL. And then you've got some guys moving up into the top 10 that are surprising. Is Andy Dalton the top 5 quarterback? Find out tomorrow. Where is Derek Carr? And I'll tell you one thing. In my preview, I decided when you looked at the guys that were out just on that fringe top 10, and you looked at the next 9 or 10 guys, what I saw was a bunch of, let's say, veterans, guys that have been in the league for 5, 6, 10 years that have talent or are decent, but just frankly don't seem like they really care about being in the top 10. They make mistakes. They're inconsistent. They've been doing this for years and years. I'm talking about guys like Matthew Stafford. I'm talking about guys like Eli Manning. I'm talking about these guys that, Matt Ryan. To me, I'm tired of dealing with when they're going to take the next step. So I decided Why not go with Derek Carr as the 10th best quarterback in the NFL? He's playing great. He looks like he wants to be an elite quarterback. He's doing it with the Oakland Raiders, which is phenomenal. And, he's got a top receiver now that the two of them could connect for the next 10 years and be something really historic. So I'll ask you, Rob, with Derek Carr, Blake Bortles, and Teddy Bridgewater, how do you rank those three right now?
Well, I think that Carr is definitely the number one out of those three. And I think you made the fantastic point towards the end there, Kenny, about he's doing it with Oakland. Now, this is a team that for, about 10 years now has just been every single year a lost cause, apart from maybe a slightly competitive 2 or 3 years with Cable and then obviously Hugh Jackson. So Derek Carr, if you needed somebody to win you a game, just one-off game in the NFL, you would probably take Derek Carr over the likes of Matthew Stafford. You would probably take him over the likes of maybe even a Drew Brees right now. I mean, he's playing really well, and he's giving his team a real chance to win a lot of games. I think he's only been picked off 3 times. So there's a lot to like there. When he was coming up through the draft, there was no obvious limitations. He made a very good range of throws. If you watched him in his final year with Fresno State, he just took a major stride. Before that, he was kind of talked about mainly because of the bloodlines. Obviously, his brother David was the former number 1 overall pick for Houston. So he was kind of talked about a lot. But watching the tape, he wasn't very impressive at all, made too many mistakes, turned the ball over. And then in his final year, it all just came together for him. Really good season he put together there, throwing to Devontae Adams, of course. But the thing is that there was nothing that really stood out physically. So he wasn't incredibly elusive, wasn't like a running back in the backfield. He had okay arm strength, but you wondered whether or not his ceiling was just average. And that is ultimately why he ends up going at the start of round 2, as opposed to being a high first-round pick. Oakland takes the guy, invests in him, believes in him. Their plan initially was sound, to bring in a veteran in Matt Schaub and then let Derek Carr sort of learn the ropes. Schaub was terrible. They throw Carr in there. He kind of takes his lumps a little bit last season on an awful team. But then they did the best thing they possibly could. Go and get a legit number 1 receiver in Amari Cooper. And it's kind of naive to draft a QB and then not have a plan for who he's going to throw to, or not try and get one of those truly elite guys. They've got that with Cooper. It seems very similar to me, Kenny. I don't know what you think of it, but the year that Cincinnati took A.J. Green in the top 10, and then they go and take Andy Dalton in the top of the second round.
Mm-hmm,
they had at least had a plan there. You could see what they were trying to do. And that's all you can ask from your team, is that they have a plan that makes sense, that you can kind of see what they're doing. And even if it doesn't work out, well, fair play, they had a go. Oakland have done the best possible thing they could do to give themselves a chance to be competitive. And hey, they've won a couple of games. They looked good doing it yesterday. Let's see if they can build up that defense to give Derek Carr even more support.
It's not something, another, funny enough, another example that I could think of would be David Carr and Andre Johnson. That one didn't work out for David Carr. It did work out for Andre Johnson. But maybe I think you could also argue that Oakland has done a good job of building their offensive line in a way that Houston didn't in 2002, 2003. I think that they've managed to find some pretty good offensive linemen. Derek Carr's been sacked 8 times this season. And then I think if you look at another guy who's been sacked 19 times this season, Blake Bortles, he was sacked league-high 55 times last season. But Bortles is on pace for 34 touchdowns. He doesn't have a good completion percentage. He's still going to throw about 18 interceptions. But he's much improved, at least statistically, from last year. And I think it's also, you can make the case, hey, like Allen Robinson was a good prospect, but it's not like they spent a high draft pick on him. Allen Hurns was a nobody. They did go out and sign Julius Thomas, but he hasn't played much of a factor this season. If you look at the weapons that Blake Bortles has, it's pretty amazing that, he is on pace for over 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns. Does Blake Bortles, he was the number 3 pick, does he still have more potential than the rest of the QBs in terms of his ceiling in 4 or 5 years?
I think that Blake Bortles is possibly the most maddening player that you will watch right now, because you kind of see. I watched most of the Wembley game for my sins yesterday, and it turned out to be a pretty good game actually against Buffalo. But he was moving around and he was elusive and he made some plays. There was one touchdown throw that he made. I can't remember who the receiver was. I think it was Alan Hearns, where he's kind of done a little bootleg to the left, thrown wide open receiver. Really nice play. But then there was another play later on, and I think it was a pick six in the end, where he's kind of just under a little bit of pressure and just threw it up for grabs right down the middle. Now, could you imagine, those Seahawks blown fourth quarter leads over the last few weeks?
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, those ones. Well, imagine instead of just going 3 and out and punting it, imagine if Russell Wilson in that exact same situation had kind of just stood in the pocket, felt a little bit of pressure and thought, what the hell, I'm just going to throw this up in the air for grabs. And it was picked off for a pick six, and then needed to go and get the touchdown to win it on offense. That is what Bortles did yesterday, which is just, it just makes too many bonehead decisions. And while he's physically gifted, he's elusive, he extends plays, he just makes too many mistakes and turns the ball over too much. Now, he's not been helped out that much, because while we were sort of praising Oakland for their approach, getting Amari Cooper, not reaching on the quarterback, sort of letting Derek Carr come to them. Well, look what, let me just run off some of the players, Kenny, that Jacksonville passed on, considering that they took 2 receivers in the second round, Allen Robinson and Marquise Lee. So they passed on Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, and Odell Beckham Jr. Now, would it not have made more sense, and it's very easy in hindsight to say this, but wouldn't they have been better off taking one of those receivers in the top 10? And they were in perfect position to go and get one of the quarterbacks in the second round, a small move up the board like Minnesota did with Seattle. The Seahawks were desperately trying to trade out of the 32nd pick. Why didn't Jacksonville use their contacts with Gus Bradley and say, hey, we'll take that pick off you, we'll go and get the quarterback, whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, whether it's Derek Carr, or somebody else? Why didn't they sort of take that approach? What was it about Blake Bortles at UCF that made them think, yeah, do you know what? We're not going to take Sammy Watkins or Mike Evans or Odell Beckham or Aaron Donald or one of these fantastic players that were available in the 2014 draft. What made them think that Blake Bortles was their guy?
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned Robinson and Hearns. What is the story with Allen Hearns? Undrafted, but I assume you must know who he is somewhat, because he did play at the University of Miami. And now, through his first 23 career games, he's got 1190, 11 touchdowns. I mean, this year he's on pace for 1,200 yards. What do you know about Hearns?
He was really good last year and kind of emerged while everyone's kind of expecting Robinson and Marquise Lee to be the guy. It was Allen Hearns who obviously sort of stepped up to the plate, had a pretty decent year. I'm just looking at his stats right now, and he's almost topped last year already, and he's only played 7 games. So he's obviously become quite a find for them. He's a 6'3" guy, so he's got a bit of size there as well. So he's doing pretty good. And in his final year at Miami, he had some yardage. I mean, he had over 1,000 yards, was probably their best receiver in 2013. So, like you say, he wasn't necessarily like he was this unknown from a small school. He was productive. I can only imagine that maybe he didn't impress in interviews, or maybe there's some injury issues there, because he obviously went undrafted in the end.
Was Marquise Lee a good pick?
In hindsight, no. And look, I was a big fan of Marquise Lee at USC, and I didn't think he was going to go the way of Robert Woods, which was looking a bit average. But the injury issues are clearly there. We all kind of expected Marquise Lee to go in the first round, and he's not been healthy enough. And when you look at, let's just say, okay, they've taken Blake Bortles, they have the 39th pick. They could have had some other guys in that range that maybe would have been able to help them a little bit more. Jeremiah Atachu, who was I really liked going into the draft, went about 11 picks later, and he would have been a nice edge option for Jacksonville. They could have had Devontae Adams, for example. Jeremy Hill would have given them that physical presence in the running game. Carlos Hyde. So I think I liked Marquise Lee. I liked that pick. But I think with hindsight, it has to be considered a bad pick.
And the last guy that to talk about in this one is Teddy Bridgewater, who, I mean, if it wasn't for it's even with his 2 touchdown performance this week, just a very bland, boring season. 5 touchdowns in 6 games, 4 interceptions. But the Vikings are 4-2. They got Adrian Peterson back. But as to your point before, the Raiders went out and got Amari Cooper. The Vikings, after this year, they didn't really do a lot. They got Mike Wallace. We talked about Stephon Diggs, who's been a nice find in the 5th round this year, but that was, you can't really count on that. We didn't talk about the fact that, they took Trey Waynes over maybe Devontae Parker or Nelson Aguilar. So they didn't really do anything to go out and get him his number 1 receiver. What are your thoughts on Bridgewater? He was a guy that some people thought could be the number 1 overall pick after a huge season at Louisville, and then just sort of got worse and worse as the draft process kept going.
Yeah, I think that with Bridgewater, they probably felt that with Adrian Peterson there that he could take some of the strain. They had spent a lot. The guys before Zimmer came in obviously had been there when they drafted Cordarrelle Patterson, who was a wide receiver who's not worked out. They signed Greg Jennings. They'd spent a 2nd-round pick on Kyle Rudolph. So they probably felt like, well, we've invested a lot in weapons. We've got Adrian Peterson. So maybe Teddy Bridgewater will be an option. The more I watched of Bridgewater leading up to the 2014 draft, the less and less I liked. And I'm still not 100% sold, because you watch him against San Francisco, and I bet you saw the game, Kenny, the first Monday night of the season, the first week. And he was painful to watch. I mean, he was painfully bad. And did not look like an NFL quarterback. And that is not a one-off. I mean, you can watch him on a given week, and I hope he plays like this against Seattle in a few weeks' time. If he's having a bad day, he's having a really bad day. And if Adrian Peterson's not rolling, then that offense just looks terrible. But then there are other times when he looks really sharp. So yesterday he had this really good play where it was a play fake in the red zone, completely sold it. Sort of scrambled a little bit to the right-hand side, was under real pressure, had a guy in his face, and just like with a flick of the wrist, just flicked it straight to Kyle Rudolph in the end zone for a touchdown. And it was just a really, really nice play. And you kind of sit up a little bit and go, oh, that's interesting. And then he found Stephon Diggs on a deep route, really nice, gave the receiver a chance, and Stephon Diggs just outran his guy, made a really good grab. But, Bridgewater downfield throw, it's the kind of throw that he needs to make. The big question for me with Bridgewater is, is he ever going to sort of take the next step and be a really productive guy? And he only really has to be sort of Russell Wilson production level in terms of passing, that is, because of Peterson. But could you ever really see him outgunning Aaron Rodgers in a game, even in Minnesota? It's hard to imagine that happening. And because of that, and because of the limitations he has, I'm not totally sold. As for whether or not Trey Waynes was the right pick for Minnesota at number 11, I can see why they did it, because he was really, really fast at the combine, really nice length, but was incredibly grabby. And because of that, you felt like he was going to come to the next level and get a lot of flags. I think that is proving to be the case already. But when you kind of look at the next lot of guys who went after him at number 11, there's not anybody who. I was never that sold on Devontae Parker, but the one thing that Parker had, of course, is that he knows Teddy Bridgewater. So you could have paired Parker with Bridgewater potentially. But then Mike Zimmer spent a lot of time trying to defend Mike Wallace when he was the Cincinnati defensive coordinator, and Mike Wallace had his best years at Pittsburgh and knew what he was capable of downfield and the explosive player that he could be. So I'm not surprised that they went down that road instead. Mike Zimmer will have just hated defending Mike Wallace at Pittsburgh, and no doubt had a major say in bringing him to Minnesota.
Let's go back with the year or two when we were talking about, just briefly there, some of the wide receivers from the 2014 class, which already, I remember, we did our draft show in 2014. You called this, could be the best receiver class of all time. And only a season and a half later, it looks like it really is. When you look at the fact that a guy like Martavis Bryant, who is one of the best young receivers in the NFL, has the 11th most receiving yards in this class. I know he's missed some time, but when you look at the guys ahead of him, you're talking about Dante Moncrief, Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin, Sammy Watkins, Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry, John Brown, Jordan Matthews, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, not including Devontae Adams. We'll see if Marquise Lee can stay healthy. There was Paul Richardson tore his ACL. He was showing some signs last year before he got hurt. There are other guys, some of the tight ends we'll see, Eric Ebron, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, but there's Jason Marrow. There's just so much talent in terms of guys that catch the ball. But I know specifically there's two guys that we could debate right now, and they were drafted within 20 spots of each other in the second round. Jordan Matthews has 106 catches for 1,270 yards and 9 touchdowns with the Eagles. Jarvis Landry has 120 catches for 1,153 yards and 7 touchdowns. Rob, give me your thoughts. What do these guys do good and bad?
So Jordan Matthews is a guy that I really, really, really do not like. And he's a really popular guy with anybody who seems to write or tweet about the NFL. They just seem to love Jordan Matthews. And I'm waiting to see what all the fuss is about. Now, theoretically, he is Philadelphia's top target. But every time I watch Philadelphia, I hate watching him play. And it was the same at Vanderbilt as well. I mean, he drops too many passes. And you see it in last night's game against Carolina. Ball's thrown his way and he spilled it. Or ball's thrown his way and he's tipped it up in the air and it's a potential interception. And if you watch Philadelphia enough, and I've seen quite a few of their games now, this happens too often. There are too many sort of mental mistakes where he takes his eye off the ball, or he's turning upfield or before he's caught the pass. He has this face that he looks constantly pissed off with the world as well. I mean, he is, if you were to look up the word surly in the dictionary, there would be a big fat picture of Jordan Matthews' face, just staring back here, looking like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders just after he scored a touchdown. Now, look, I'm not saying he's a horrendous player by any stretch, or that he's necessarily a bad player, because he's not a bad player. I just hate watching him play, and I don't take any pleasure from watching him perform for Philadelphia.
Yeah, I would have thought Surly was a town outside Sheffield, maybe a smaller one. He had 10 catches for 102 yards in week 1. He had 6 for 80 in week 2. But over the last 5 weeks, Matthews has proven to be less of a factor, catching 23 of 41 targets. So barely 50% of his targets are being caught. 9.4 yards per catch, which is not anything you want from a number one receiver, and 43 yards per game. So he hasn't done anything over the last 5 weeks. That being said, what are your thoughts on Sam Bradford? Because I know in my QB rankings, he's one of the worst.
I think it's time to accept once and for all that Sam Bradford it's not going to work for him. Now, whether or not the injuries have just destroyed his career, and whether or not if he'd have stayed healthy, he would have made something of his career, we'll never know. But right now, he is not an effective quarterback. I mean, he looks terrible. And there's no real redeeming quality. I think that Chip Kelly's offense is miscast in the NFL anyway. I think this kind of rapid fire, all they seem to be good at is going 3 and out quicker than everybody else in the league. And then once you do that, you're putting your defense back on the field. They're getting gassed too early. It's a really bad combination. When it doesn't work for Philadelphia, it doesn't work. So they need a quarterback who can make the simple passes, make completions, make a few plays with his legs. And it just isn't happening. And I just wonder how many times Chip Kelly is going to have the opportunity to sort of make a decision on the quarterback. So we've seen Nick Foles, we've seen Mark Sanchez, drafted Matt Barkley, and then traded him to Arizona. We're now seeing Sam Bradford come in. The guy that he clearly wanted is now playing in Tennessee, and he should have just had the nuts to go and get him last year and just solve this issue once and for all. Didn't want to overpay. Well, just do it. Think about overpaying when you're back in college football with USC or whatever next year, because he needed his guy to make his offense tick, and he doesn't have that. Sam Bradford is not going to be that guy, and I bet they're thanking their lucky stars they didn't sign him to a big extension, which was talked about in the summer.
Well, let's say this. I mean, Tennessee got Chip Kelly's guy. Tennessee has a coach who is 4-29 or 4-30 over his life. Maybe Tennessee goes out and gets their coach for their quarterback, because, if the Eagles don't figure it out this year, and the Titans, I think they're obviously going to fire Ken Whisenhunt, if not before the season, then after the season, because they're not going anywhere with him.
Could do.
And maybe the Titans trade a first-round pick to the Eagles. Maybe it goes the other way. They trade a first-round pick to the Eagles or something like that for Chip Kelly, because they believe that he can figure out how best to, mentor their franchise quarterback. Because when you're a team that's like the Titans or whatever, if you've got a guy that you've drafted second overall at quarterback, Your main focus now is how can we give this guy the best opportunity to succeed. And, it's just a theory that I'm throwing out there right now. But if Chip Kelly is on the table, and, I've heard also, Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll, these are among the guys, they like to be talked about. They like to be in the conversation. If someone's throwing out their name as a possibility for a job, they'll take it. They're not the job, but they'll take the conversation. They want to be in headlines. I heard someone say down here, and I live in Los Angeles, and down here, and they talk about the USC job, and guys that know Pete Carroll for a long time are basically like, when his name came up for the USC job, they wouldn't be surprised if Pete Carroll goes to the guy that's asking the question before the press conference, says, "Hey, ask me about the USC job." And then he goes, "Okay." Ask him about the USC job. No, what are you talking about? I'm not going to the USC job. That's so they can say Pete Carroll mentioned for USC job. And there may not have been anything in there. So, and I also have heard the same thing about Chip Kelly. He likes to be in the conversation. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's at least conversation about Chip Kelly going to Tennessee, or Chip Kelly continuing conversation about Tennessee or USC or some other random thing, because it's totally within their MO, I think. So maybe that's a possibility. What do you think?
Yeah, why not? I mean, look, Ken Whisenhunt, like you say, I think he is 4-30. Where, unless he has Kurt Warner coming, hauling his 45-year-old body around the field, throwing to like a mid-20s Larry Fitzgerald, he doesn't seem to be capable of coaching a team. This is the guy who was in charge when Seattle absolutely destroyed Arizona, something like 100-0 in 2012, and was thoroughly embarrassed there. And I watched most of the Tennessee Atlanta game at the weekend and just thought the Titans look atrocious, and they've got better players. They could be competitive. And although Mariota wasn't playing in the game, they've tried to make him a pocket passer, Kenny, and that's it's not quite as extreme as the Kaepernick example, but it's almost there. Why limit the guy? Just let him be himself. And Tennessee aren't doing that. They're trying to turn him into Ben Roethlisberger or something. So Ken Whisenhunt needs to go. And if it's Chip Kelly or somebody else, they need somebody who's creative enough to use Mariota in the best way.
I wanted to talk about Arizona. They're playing on Monday night against the Baltimore Ravens. People may be listening to this after the game. That's fine. We can talk about Arizona because a lot of people that listen to this are Seahawks fans. And that's the team standing. One of the teams. Now it looks as though the St. Louis Rams may also be standing in front of the Seahawks and their path to the playoffs. But I want to talk because we're talking about young NFL stars, and the Cardinals have a lot of them in one specific unit, which would be the secondary. And I want to get your thoughts. They've got Deion Buchanan, who's 23, Tyrann Mathieu, who's 23, Tony Jefferson, who's 23, Patrick Peterson, who's 25, and then a couple of slightly older guys, Gerard Powers, who's 28, Rashad Johnson, who's 29. So among those guys, who's the most important player to this unit? Who's maybe a little overrated? What's their MO? Like, what do you think of these 6 players in Arizona's backfield?
I don't think any of them really stand out. I think the one thing that I've kind of noticed the most from watching Arizona, when I've had the opportunity to, is that they live and die by the big play. And that's been their kind of MO for a while now. And whoever's in the backfield, whoever is playing quarterback, whatever the defensive scheme is, they've lost Todd Bowles, they are going to live and die by their ability to chuck it downfield with Carson Palmer or whoever, and then finish off a drive. And when they don't, and I saw them against Pittsburgh, where they had, they kind of dominated the game, yet didn't have enough explosive plays, and they let Pittsburgh just hang around long enough that, they made it a game. And then towards the end, even the Michael Vick led Pittsburgh Steelers, who were just horrendous, by the way, managed to do enough to just sort of limit the explosive plays. And because of that, you kind of look at Arizona on a really good day. They a really attractive team to watch because they make some really exciting downfield throws, and for that reason they're really good. But then they will play a game where they just really look horrible. And fortunately for the Seahawks, that's been pretty much every time that they've played Seattle. And if it wasn't for the way that Seattle blew the game in 2013 in Seattle, then they would have pretty much had a clean sweep over the Cardinals under Bruce Arians. So I think that's pretty much their MO, and for that reason, they are probably the most boom or bust team in the league.
Yeah. It's totally accurate. I mean, when you look at their, it's funny is the way that they feel based on the first couple of games and a game against the Lions since then. But based on that, they feel like, oh, they're like this. The year that the Chicago Bears forced like 50 some turnovers and were like, they didn't have any good quarterback. Their offense, ran through Matt Forte or something. But they forced so many turnovers that it was insane. Their games were fun to watch, but also if they didn't force a turnover, they were horrible. And you look at them, I mean, the Cardinals are 5th in turnovers forced, which is good, and it's, very fine. But you would have thought that it was first. And if you look at their 6 games, they're 4-2. They're 4-0 when they force a turnover. They're 0-2 when they don't force a turnover. They're 21st in turnovers. So they're actually turning over the ball quite a bit. And when they look at a game like this week against the Baltimore Ravens are 1-5. But, I mean, they've lost a game by 3 in overtime. They lost by 5. They lost by 4. They lost by 4. And they lost by 6. So their 5 losses were all within less than a touchdown. And, they're 14th in turnovers. So if they manage to protect the football tonight, and then I know this is probably going to be late for a lot of people listening to it, but if they manage to protect the football, they're going to have a good chance to beat the Cardinals, I think. And the other thing is that the Ravens are 31st in turnovers forced. So they would have to, figure out how to get a mistake here or there. But then it's interesting when you look at the Cardinals, if the Ravens do upset them tonight, everything's going to change in the NFC West, because then Arizona goes to Cleveland. Maybe Cleveland and Josh McCown's got an upset in them. And then both the Seahawks and the Cardinals have the bye in week 9, and then they play in Seattle in week 10. So the whole thing could change by then, and those early season losses for Seattle, if they can beat Dallas this week, it's going to be significant.
It absolutely is. And one quick note on the Seahawks before we continue with this look in at the sort of younger players in the league. Michael Bennett is leading the NFL for sacks. And I think that has not been taught. I don't think people have noticed that in the last 24 hours. I don't think anybody's kind of mentioned it, but Michael Bennett leads the NFL for sacks and may be the best pass rusher in the league right now.
Well, I will toot my horn here, Rob. I tweeted it yesterday at some point.
I must have been in bed. Otherwise, I definitely would have given that a retweet, Kenny.
Because I looked at, I was looking at the NFL leaders. I saw Michael Bennett tied 6.5 with Carlos Dunlap of the Bengals, but they hadn't updated all of that. Was going into that was after the Thursday night game. So then I just had to look around, calculate some things, and Chandler Jones of the Patriots also has 6.5. So it's Jones, Bennett, and
Dunlap.
So, but yeah, I mean, for Bennett, I think if he gets on a roll, it'll be nice to see him get a few more 1-sack games consistently. If that's what it takes, and it'll be interesting to see if he does become a Seahawks player with something that we haven't had since Chris Clemens, which is consistent double-digit sacks. But even then, isn't it interesting, Rob, that you could argue that Cliff Averill is having the more complete season, couldn't you?
Possibly. No? I think they're right up there, aren't they? I mean, they're both playing so well. I think the only disappointing thing is that they tend to have games a bit like the Carolina game where Averill was really, really solid in that game, but Bennett just didn't seem to have much of an impact. And I think that's something to do with the way that they protect the interior. And I think it's something where Seattle's going to struggle. I actually think Seattle will struggle more with a pass rush against a team that is strong inside, where they can't create a lot of sort of chaos on the inside, which maybe allows some of the pressure for Averill one-on-one. When they can't sort of collapse the middle, then it's going to be tough. And I think we saw that against Carolina. And I think we may see it against Dallas coming up. They may have a similar issue there. But then there are some teams that are just really weak inside. And I think they're going to have a lot of success against, for example, Pittsburgh banged up inside. Arizona don't have a great offensive line. And then, of course, the 49ers, the pathetic, pitiful 49ers, if they play the way they did last Thursday, then Seattle they could probably start Tavares Jackson in that game.
Let's say the Seahawks have a bad offensive line. So let's transition over to a question about some of the good young offensive linemen around the NFL, none of which reside on the Seahawks. Rob, if you could give me like your all 25 and under starting offensive line, these guys that have come into the league in the last couple of years, 3 years, who would be your all under 25-ish offensive line?
So I think at left tackle, you'd put Taylor Lewan, who's at Tennessee. And out of all the left tackles that went in 2014, he seems to be the one who has had the earliest impact and does everything kind of well. I mean, he's got plus athleticism, had a really good combine workout. Pass protection is fine, has a bit of a nasty streak to him. He's got a quirky personality that really rubs people up the wrong way. But he's a pretty good left tackle with the chance to sort of get into that top tier. So I think that I would go with Taylor Lewan as the left tackle. At left guard, not a real surprise that I'll put Joel Bitonio there. He was fantastic at Nevada. I think the Seahawks should have picked him. I think the Seahawks should have taken him in the first round at number 32 after winning the Super Bowl. And felt very good about it. And they should have taken or found a way to move up a couple of spots and get Jarvis Landry in the second round. I think that obviously it's very easy to say that now. They've both been fantastic, but it was there. I mean, it wasn't anything like we're talking about it now and saying, well, why didn't they do that? I mean, this is something we talked about for weeks leading up to the 2014 draft. Bitonio and Landry, two really good players. So Bitonio at left guard dominated UCLA and Florida State when he was at Nevada. Has just slotted right in for Cleveland, has been one of their big success stories over the last couple of years. Great pass pro, nasty streak, loves to get to the second level, almost no flaws, just a brilliant pick for Cleveland. So Joel Bitonio, left guard. I think at center, it's very easy to put Travis Frederick in there. At Dallas, looked the part in Wisconsin, looked like a first-round center. That they're a rare thing these days. Looked like a first-round center, powerful, does everything well. Travis Frederick is the center I would go for. Trey Turner at Carolina. Right guard for me, one of the better young interior linemen in the league. He's powerful but still athletic. Looked really, really good for LSU, and not enough people talked about him. And he lasted until the very end of round 3, which is a big, big surprise. I had him in round 2 in 2014. So, he lasted a bit longer than everybody expected, but he's a big-time success story for Carolina. He is one of the more underrated offensive linemen in the league. And then at right tackle, I'll go with Juwan James. I think that he's had a couple of rough days. Against Buffalo at the weekend, he had one big whiff on a play, but I think he's just a really solid right tackle. He never got beat for the Tennessee Volunteers when he played for them. In the whole year, I watched every single game that they played in 2013, and he never got beat once. And he's just come into the league, and and in a league that is desperate for good right tackles, he is a decent one. So I'm going to put him at right tackle.
Let's quickly just go through, let's call it a rapid fire sort of session with some of these names here that have come through in the last couple of years, and just give me your thoughts about what you thought about them going into the draft and if you think that their early success is sustainable. So just, a few, points on each of these guys. What do you think of some of these guys that we didn't really talk about a lot before the draft, starting with Redskins running back Matt Jones?
Really liked him before the draft. Thought he would be a good mid-value, athletic, physical running back. Did like him a lot. From what I've seen, a bit hit and miss, but Washington's running game is all over the place at the moment. So perhaps not a surprise. If they can establish a running game, then he's probably going to lead the way.
What do you think of, GM Scott McLaughlin? He had a part in building the Seahawks. He had a part in building the 49ers before all of those parts fell apart. Now he's the GM of the Redskins, getting another chance to do it again. And he comes in through a draft, and he's got, Brandon Scherf in the first round, finds Matt Jones, finds Jamison Crowder. I think there were a couple other guys that are at least participating as rookies, including Jamison Crowder. Do you like the Redskins rookie class?
Yeah, I do. And I like the job that he's doing. They're instantly more respectable than they were a year ago. I think that they've handled the Robert Griffin thing the right way, rather than just sort of throw him out there and have that as a major distraction all the way. He seems to have been the one who's been quite firm on this. He is not starting. He is not going to be anywhere near the starting team. We're going to put Kirk Cousins in there, who is much better than Colt McCoy. We're going to put Kirk Cousins in there, and we're just going to go with it. And it doesn't mean that Kirk Cousins is ever going to lead Washington to the Super Bowl, but this is the best situation for our team. I like what he did with the draft, like Brandon Scherf. They want to become physical. They want to be tough. They want to be hard to beat. And they are right in the mix in the NFC East, and I don't think many people expected that, but they're right there. You know, if they can win in their division, then they have a chance of, you never know, just sneaking it.
What do you think of Duke Johnson, the Browns running back, who has been a big threat on the ground, but also in the receiving game for them?
Well, before the draft, I thought that he was more of a guy that would just be used in the passing game, and that is how Cleveland drafted him. They want to use him more out of the backfield, catching passes. That is how I sort of projected him at Miami, because he's not. He made some physical plays, but you never sort of felt that he could do it at the next level, and he was never going to be a lead back. So his role is going to be kind of limited to that. Obviously, he is going to take some snaps out of the backfield as well. But for me, he's kind of like it, like the Giovanni Bernard type running back. Mm-hmm. That's what he's going to end up being.
Someone that you watched last night in the Eagles game, Jordan Hicks, was a third-round linebacker taken out of Texas. He's got the most tackles for all rookies with 37. He's got a sack. He's got 3 fumble recoveries. He's got an interception. He's got 2 passes defense. He's got a forced fumble. What do you think of Eagles linebacker Jordan Hicks?
Yeah, another guy I liked. I didn't really focus on with Seattle because he didn't necessarily fill their criteria, and there was one of the few positions that I think they were pretty good at. Obviously had Kevin Pierre-Louis, and were retaining the guys like Irvin and Wagner and KJ Wright, and they had Brock Croyle. So, he never really sort of got on our radar in terms of the Seahawks, but he was always going to be a solid pick for someone, and he seems to be doing really well for Philadelphia.
Bills cornerback Ronald Darby has contributed right away. How do you think about Darby and some of the guys that were those early cornerbacks like Trey Waynes that were way ahead of him on the boards? What did you think of Darby?
I think that he provided good value for them because throughout the draft process last year, he was kind of considered a first-round option. I never quite saw him that way. But I think the range that Buffalo got him in was respectable. I have seen Buffalo a couple of times now, and he's I can't remember which game it was in, but he made one really nice play and they mentioned Ronald Darby, and it kind of registered with me that, oh yeah, that's the guy that they drafted this year. So he seems like he's fitting in nicely. He's more of a slot guy than a natural outside guy. As for some of the other rookies that have kind of gone at the quarterback position, I think that Trey Waynes, Kevin Johnson, and Marcus Peters have all shown how difficult it is to be a first-round quarterback, because you're expected to step straight in and deliver. It is very, very hard to do that. And rookie corners generally struggle. There are very few that sort of just take to it straight away. Peters, who was at Kansas City now, got bossed around by Jeremy Hill in the run game against Cincy, which is, he could not tackle the guy. He's had a few issues in coverage, also had some nice plays as well. Waynes has remained pretty grabby. Kevin Johnson was a bit overrated, in my opinion, going into the draft. I'm not really focused on him since he got in there. But I kind of understand Seattle's approach to, look, if it's a special quarterback, then we'll take him and we'll coach him up and we'll use him. But if he's not a special quarterback, we're not drafting him in the first round, because there is a lot of pressure on these guys to start early, and it is one of the hardest positions to do
that. Like Peters, we talked a lot about the 3 Huskies that went in the first round for the first time ever, but also 2 rookies have 4 sacks this year, and they were taken back-to-back in the second round. The first of which, Hau'oli Kikaha, out of Washington, outside linebacker with the Saints. He's got 4 sacks, and he's gotten them in 4 games. So it's not just been one outburst against a quarterback, against a horrible offensive line. He's consistently getting the sacks, and he has 3 forced fumbles. What do you think of Kikaha?
Well, going into the draft, there was a lot of talk about injury issues, and you always seem like more of an effort guy than an athlete. And I think that was shown in his workouts beforehand. So it was hard to get too excited about him. But I saw some of the game against Indianapolis yesterday, and he made one really nice move and then got his hands up to tip an Andrew Luck pass, which was a really nice play. And that was encouraging. I wasn't aware that he had 4 sacks this year, which is impressive, isn't it, for his first year. He's on target to, get 6, 7, or 8 as a rookie, which would be really good for him as a second-round pick. But I liked the play that he made when he tipped the pass against Luck yesterday, and it showed that, sometimes that effort and just maybe being naturally good at pass rushing can get you through. You don't always have to necessarily be that 4-5 runner.
Taken right after Kikaha was Eric Kendricks out of UCLA. He has 4 sacks in his last 3 games with the Vikings. Not the forced fumbles of Kikaha, but 32 tackles, solo tackles, 3 assists. What were your thoughts on Kendricks?
I think everybody who watched Kendricks play in college really liked him. It was just, where does he fit? Because he wasn't quite as athletic as his brother Michael Kendricks, and you also wondered if the value was there, because Michael still went in round 2, Bobby Wagner went in round 2, Levante David went in round 2. So even though he kind of you wondered whether or not he would go in the first round, it was probably best that he waited a little bit. Mike Zimmer's scheme utilizes quality linebackers better than most, so it was a really good fit for him, and I'm not surprised at all that Zimmer's getting production out of him.
Let's wrap up with a couple more players. And I want to go back and include a couple guys from 2014, starting with Aaron Lynch, who has come on for the 49ers this year. While the opportunities have opened up, not everyone has stepped up, but Lynch has. So what were your thoughts on Aaron Lynch, and is he going to be someone that the Seahawks have to deal with for a long time?
I really did not like Aaron Lynch going into the draft, because he was at Notre Dame and kind of flattered to deceive, and then just left. And then I think he ended up at USF in the end. So he was in South Florida, lost a load of weight, and was totally ineffective. And then kind of recaptured some momentum in the postseason during the workout process. And yeah, he played pretty well for San Francisco last season. This year, I think he had pressure against Seattle's O-line on Thursday, but who hasn't so far this year? And the other thing is that I just question his maturity. The way that he left Notre Dame, and then I'm pretty sure in the offseason he posted something about how he was going to smash the Seahawks up, and he sort of was using the hashtag lynch mob. I'm not quite sure if he knows what a lynch mob actually is.
Maybe not.
But it's probably not the wisest hashtag. It was almost as insensitive as Colin Kaepernick's 7 storms, with a picture of a particularly fatal storm that had happened in America over the summer. So I think the two of them probably need to go and have a sit down somewhere.
And I want you to help me rank. If you were starting a franchise, you were going to pick these guys to be your running back. We got 3 guys from the last 2 drafts that are, just significant right now for whatever reason. So obviously Todd Gurley, who has played in 4 games. He has 442 yards. He's averaging 6 yards per carry, 110.5 yards per game. Nothing not to like there. Devonta Freeman from the 2014 draft has been the surprise. He leads the NFL in rushing yards with 621, 88.7 yards per game, 4.7 yards per attempt, and 9 rushing touchdowns. And then Melvin Gordon, who was also highly rated in the 2015 NFL draft, but is just 328 yards, no touchdowns, 3.9 yards per carry, 46.9 yards per game with the San Diego Chargers and that offense. So if you were to rank those 3, if you were going to start a team today and you wanted to get your running back, how would you rank those 3?
I think Gurley has to be number 1 for me. I know that Devonta Freeman has just been superb, a monster. Just watching him play recently against New Orleans, and just a production machine this year. But Todd Gurley, I had Red Zone on when St. Louis were playing, and every time they flicked back and he was getting the ball, he was just making it happen. That guy is going to be a pain in the arse for the Seahawks for the next few years. And it's going to change the way that the Seahawks-Rams games are played, because all of a sudden the Rams have got somebody who is, let's be honest here, is probably better than Marshawn Lynch is right now. Lynch is at the back end of his career. Gurley is at the start of his. The speed, the power, the size, just if this guy stays healthy, he is a superstar and will be the best running back in the league.
So then the question is Devonta Freeman or Melvin Gordon?
Melvin Gordon has been a major disappointment, and he was a guy that I really liked going into the draft. And I'm surprised that he's looked as average as he has, but it's hard not to be anything but really disappointed with him. He doesn't have any, you don't sort of see any real speed with him, and he wasn't fast at the combine, so that's not a surprise. But then physically he's not there. Some of the big plays that he had for Wisconsin, you do start to wonder, hey, how much was this down to the blocking and the huge line that they have at Wisconsin? Because he just doesn't get in the holes that he gets for San Diego. As a pass catcher, relatively ineffective so far. And as much as I really like Gordon and loved him going into the draft, you kind of wonder whether San Diego got a bit of buyer's remorse there.
So then you would pick Devonta Freeman over Gordon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, with having that time. And, it's been an interesting year. If you just look at yards per game, Todd Gurley leads the NFL. People are going to talk about whether or not, 4 games is 4 games. I could go back and look at some other 4-game stints. So we want to, obviously we are impressed, but we also want to see what happens throughout the end of the year. And then we'll start to talk about who the best running back in the NFL is. But then you got Le'Veon Bell. Chris Ivory, has come on the scene.
Fantastic.
At 27 and become one of the best backs in the NFL. Now, this is a guy that went to Washington State for a small amount of time and then had to transfer to TIFF, I think, and then now bounced around the NFL and then just hang on with the Jets. Do you remember even talking or hearing about Chris Ivory until the last couple of years?
Yeah, every single year that he was seemingly available from New Orleans via trade, I was desperate for the Seahawks to trade for this guy because he seemed to me like the perfect number 2 to Marshawn Lynch. And I think he's proven that he's even more than that now. He just runs with that same physical bruising style. I was at Wembley when the Jets destroyed the Dolphins recently, and he was by far the best player on the field. And, I was very lucky. I got to speak to Breno Giacomini after the game, former Seahawks right tackle, and asked him about Chris Ivory. And, the first thing he said was, he reminds me of Marshawn Lynch. So I think that the entire league missed a trick by not investing in Ivory, probably because of the health issues. But more power to New York. They've got a really, really good player.
Yeah, and if you just want to know the state of the NFL running back, Chris Johnson ninth in yards per game. So,
hey, what a strange year though. I mean, who would have thought that Devonta Freeman would be the leading rusher after however many weeks we've had, and that Doug Martin would be number 2, and that DeAndre Hopkins would be the leading receiver with Brian Hoyer and Ryan Mallett basically swapping games week in, week out, that Josh Norman would lead the league in interceptions, and yeah, it's just a really, and that the Seahawks would be 3-4 instead of 7-0. So there's a lot of surprises this year.
Yeah, it's been a super weird year. Like I said, I was surprised by what I decided to do in the quarterback rankings and how things have really changed and moved. And you see guys like Peyton Manning and Drew Brees sort of move to the side. Brees not obviously nearly to the degree of Manning, whereas some other guys, I mean, the fact that Andy Dalton is playing as well as Aaron Rodgers statistically, and we're 6-7 games into the year, it's pretty wild. And so that's our first NFL-ish, mostly focused edition of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. And we will come back next week, see what's going on in college, celebrate Wazoo's win over Stanford, and the Seahawks getting back to 4-4. So thanks again for listening. Subscribe on iTunes. Follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com, FieldGoals.com. I'm Twitter Kenneth Arthur S. And come back next Monday for another show.